Okay, so my name's Peter, and I'm a front developer here at STRV, and today I will be talking about CSS. Basically, what tools do we like to use, what methodologies do we like to use, and how do we try to avoid the most common pitfalls. So for the overview, I'm firstly going to talk about editor config. I'm going to also talk about CSS Preprocessors, Flexbox, also BAM, which is a methodology for writing CSS at larger teams. And now we will also take a look at inline styles in React and usage of Radium. So for the editor config is a simple file that you can place at the root of your project. And basically what it does is it ensures that all your developers are using the same settings for stuff like indentation size, indentation style, char set, whether or not you want to trailing white space, that kind of thing. You can go to the editorconfig.org to see all the documentation, all the possible values and config, and we strongly recommend using it. It's just good for you to have all the developers using the same config. You can also target specific files or directories using the square brackets notation. And so yeah, that's editor config. It also always overrides your personal preference in your IDE or editor. Moving on to CSS Preprocessors. First I'm going to ask how many of you are actually using CSS Preprocessors? Okay, how many of you are using less? SAS? Okay, Stylus? Cool. So, very good to know. Cool. So, what's the reason for preprocessors? So, CSS on its own is quite a dumb language. It's very hard to scale. It's very hard to manage on its own. And usually your CSS may look something like this. This is my attempt to be funny. Hopefully it's working. Okay, so where are the major players? The major players are Less, SAS, and Stylus. It basically extends your vocabulary. Oops. It extends your CSS vocabulary by introducing more functionality such as import, which helps you with organization of your code. It also introduces nesting, which allows you to write CSS classes faster and you don't have to repeat yourself all that much. And we also have variables, mixins, and extend, which also helps you with not repeating yourself. So for the import, import is actually a function already built into CSS. The issue, however, is that it always makes a new HTTP request for each import. So by using CSS Preprocessors, which basically serve as a compiler for your SAS files into CSS or whatever you want to use for the preprocessor. So it actually handles it for you, and it will just output a single CSS file. So for a simple example, we can divide our CSS into like chunks of, for example, blocks, base, buttons, layout, whatever. For the more complex example, you can also use folders. You can also use the asterisk as a wildcard selector that will also include all the files inside the directory. We also have nesting, which I think it's pretty straightforward. It saves you the time. You don't have to always write out the like parent, class name, that kind of thing. We also have variables, which are useful for stuff like colors, sizes, paddings, fonts, whatever. So instead of having to go to your code and changing a value like on multiple places, you can change it on a single place. Mixins, they are basically like functions which return, instead of like return value, they return and compile CSS, and you can use these to basically bundle common used styles into a function or a mixin and use it elsewhere. Extends works basically the same as you know from all the different languages. It basically extends your class by using the extend directive. How can you use CSS preprocessors? You can compile them through a command line interface, which isn't really useful. You can also use some kind of utility like CodeKit or Koala, which I recommend against because you don't have such a control over the stuff you're doing. You can also use task kernels such as Gulp or Grant, which also handles stuff like auto-prefixing or maybe concatenation, minification, and basically you have much finer control of your stuff than you do with like regular utility. And since if you're doing JavaScript applications, it's much easier for you to use. I'm missing a, okay. You can use Webpack and their loaders. They will handle the CSS for you. They will bundle it and basically inject it into your header. That's all for the preprocessors. CSS structure. So when you work in a team, it's very useful to use basically to have a consistent folder structure, same naming variable conventions, and it's much easier for a developer to jump into a project when he already knows how it's going to look like, what it's going to be structured, and when he already knows where he should look like, where he should be looking for the stuff he needs. So the way we like to structure our code usually is to divide it into like folders. So you have like base, which are styles applied for the whole website. You can also have components, rows, layout. That's pretty much how we like to do it. We also like to name our components the same as the actual class name, for example. So, for example, the button still has just the button class. So that's the tier structure. Moving on to Flexbox. How many of you are using Flexbox these days? Okay, great. So Flexbox is a feature introduced some time ago, which is basically like a replacement for dealing stuff with floats, blocks, floats, position, absolute, and just basically hacky ways to do layout. If you don't know anything about it, I would definitely recommend looking into it. I'm not going to go over all the features because it's out of the scope of this presentation. The support right now is Internet Explorer 9, and since you hear STRV, we primarily work with US startups and basically young, basically progressive companies. We don't have to care about older Internet Explorer versions. So yeah, Internet Explorer 9 upwards. There's a great blog post on CSS tricks about usage of Flexbox, and there are also very good utilities or games on the internet where you can just basically learn it through a game. And yeah, it's very useful. It's much more easier to do common things with Flexbox than you would do with floats. You don't have to care about clear fix, and it's a very powerful tool basically, and definitely have a look into it. I'm sure you won't regret it. It's one of those things that may seem maybe alien at first, but once you get used to it, you will definitely love it. And yeah, it's also used by React Native. So if you already know Flexbox, you can do layouts for React Native. So that's Flexbox. Moving on to BAM. So BAM is a highly useful, powerful, and simple naming convention to make your Frontend code easier to read and understand, easier to work with, easier to scale, more robust and explicit, and a lot more strict. The BAM approach ensures that everyone who participates in the development of a website works with a single code base and speaks the same language. Using proper naming will prepare you for the changes in the design of a website. So what are the advantages of BAM? You do get consistency. For example, you might have multiple developers on the same team, or maybe you swap developers around multiple projects. And if you use BAM, it's much easier for a developer to jump into the project and just extend the already existing code base by adding new stuff to it. Reusability. Since BAM tries to basically what's the word? Divide your interface into smaller blocks. You can usually reuse a lot of stuff, like for example buttons. You can just change the colors or whatever, and the rest will be reusable. Also, thinking in blocks and components help you figure out what your design is going to be made of. So for some cases, we firstly do the template for the website, and then we just swap it to React. So if it's written in BAM, it's also easier for us as developers to think how it's going to be implemented in React-style components. It's effective in teams, which I already mentioned, and there's also a great blog post on CSS Wizardy, which goes into great depth how does it work. So for a quick overview, the block is basically independent reusable part of the interface. So basically think of it like a component in React. It can be like a button, card form, box, basically anything that has meaning on its own. It can contain other elements or blocks, and it can also contain one or more modifiers. So elements can only be placed inside a block. They are separated by 2 underscores. So you have a class name of the parent block underscore element. It can be like a menu item, for input, image caption, and it can also contain one or more modifiers. And modifiers is basically like a modifier. You can use it to style different things, maybe have some on-off state. Basically think of it like themes, active, inactive, aligning. For a simple example, we might do like a header, like a box with header, title, and content, which is fine. However, since CSS is using the global scope, usually you have to think about, okay, since I'm using DH3 class title, am I using it somewhere else? And if I do, I have to think about, okay, is it gonna break up somewhere else? So you can obviously nest your style tags and yeah, you can nest your style tags, but by using BEM, we can see straight ahead that box header has a relation with box, and it can be only placed inside of it. So for example, when I was starting with BEM, the thing I was wondering about is how, or actually why is the box title name box title? Why is it not box _ header _ title? And the reason is that you don't have to specify always the parent class name. You always just have to specify the relation to the parent block, which is in this case box. You can also use modifiers as an example here. And if you're using preprocessors, it's quite easy to write BEM using the ampersand operator. You can chain your class names together, and basically this will compile to box -- primary and box _ header as class styles. So in React, it's maybe useful to use inline styles. It's a great way to deal with many other pitfalls of CSS. For a simple example, in React you can define your styles as an object and basically assign it to style attribute for your component or for your render method. So what are the benefits? There's a very great presentation on this link. If you will Google for CSS.js, it's one of the first links on the Google. And what's actually inline styles are solving is the global scope issue. So for example, in regular CSS, you have a one big CSS file with many globals. So if, for example, using Bootstrap, you're always importing into a file like 600 classes that are used everywhere, but you don't have to always use them. Let's call elimination. Most styles are local variables that linkers minifiers can remove. So yeah, you can eliminate the amount of that code you're not using. Also, you can minify your class names using some of the compilers here mentioned. And since everything is in JS, it may be better for some people to have everything in one place. And also by using inline styles, you are specifying styles always in a scope of a component. The drawbacks, however, in using inline styles, you won't be able to do pseudo classes like hover, active, focus, that kind of thing. You also won't be able to do media queries. And you also won't be able to extract CSS into separate file quite easily if you want to do it. And furthermore, there's no automatic vendor prefixes. There's no tool for that unless you use an external library. So in React, it's quite smart to use Radium, which is a library for handling these cases. What are the advantages? It's conceptually simple extension of normal inline styles. They are using the same syntax. Oopsie daisy. So yeah, it handles hover, focus, active. It also handles media queries. It also handles automatic vendor prefixing. It also helps you with. You can also do animations with keyframes using inline styles, and you can also. It has support for ES6 classes and create class, which means that you can use decorator operator for your component. And also React Styler allows you to write regular CSS if you would like to do that, so yeah. And for a simple example, how does it work? So again, we have a style object. We can also, with Radium, we can also nest styles into, basically, we have a base key, which is a key of style, and we can basically assign it to the button, like styles.base. For the modifiers, you can specify it again as a key, and you can do some logic actually, which is quite cool. With using inline styles, you bring basically you can do logic in JavaScript that affects styles, if that makes any sense. Browser states, so yeah, it handles hover, focus, active quite easily. You basically just type it as you would in a regular CSS. It's all handled for you. Same for media queries. And that's pretty much Radium. And that's pretty much, what are the alternatives actually? You can also use Aphrodite, which works with React as well. You can use React Style or React Inline, which basically do the same thing. They handle the browser states for you. They also handle media queries. And that's pretty much it. So thank you for your attention. and we'll have a short break. If you have any questions, I will be available downstairs, so feel free to ask whatever you want. Thank you.